Hello and welcome to this launch of Seedkit. Thank you all for joining us on what is a very exciting day. It's the culmination of a huge commitment and amount of input and work from many people and organisations across the social enterprise ecosystem. In particular, we've got the Seedkit members who are having their AGM joining us from the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation Hub down by QVM in Melbourne. So a huge shout out to that group, feeling a little bit like we're doing some sort of, live casting, aka the Matildas game or something. So we're really excited to have that whole group there. So hi, Seedkit, great to have you with us. Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Libby Ward-Christie. I'm the Director of the Centre for Social Impact at Swinburne. And we're joined here today by Professor Jo Barakat, who's the Director of the Melbourne Social Equity Institute at Melbourne Uni, and our amazing Seedkit team. And before we kick off, I'd really like to acknowledge two key people in this project and recognise them for all their hard work. The first one is Senior Researcher, Seedkit Project Manager, Evaluation Expert and all-round legend, Dr. Joanne Swan-Koo, who has just been amazingly committed and dedicated throughout this project. And I'd also like to acknowledge our social impact technologist, who's done all of our development and coding, Warren Armstrong, who has been literally coding up to the last minute here today. So thank you to Warren. So we're really excited to be able to share Seedkit with you today and outline why we've developed it, our approach to its development, its key features, and importantly, where to from here, including how to get going with using it. So Jo and I will be tag teaming throughout the session, and we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. So please either note down your questions to ask in the chat, or you can also just hold on to them and we'll open the floor towards the end. So I'd now like to acknowledge country. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country, but I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the unceded lands on which we work, learn and live, and recognise the unique place that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have in our culture and history, and as the original owners and custodians of the lands, skies and waterways of the Australian continent. Please feel free to acknowledge the country you're on in the chat as we get started today. So Jo, over to you.
Thanks, Liv, and great to see so many people here today, some of whom I know well and many of whom I imagine I'd get to know at some point. We wanted to take you through a bit of background on Seedkit, as well as the evolution of the platform before I'll hand back to Lib to provide you with some actual concrete details of what Seedkit can do. But before we do that, I just wanted to acknowledge that while, of course, we know that when people register for webinars, they don't all physically turn up, particularly when they know it's being recorded. There were about 515 people registered for Seedkit's launch today. I think that that's extraordinary in number and indicates the appetite and interest in both social enterprise and measuring and communicating social impacts. But I think what's more important is who's turned up. And I really want to acknowledge everyone who is with us, and particularly to observe that when I went through the list of people who'd registered, we really see the breadth of the social enterprise sector represented in people who chose to either join or receive a recording of today's launch. There's been a lot of talk and policy interest, particularly in work integration, social enterprises, those social enterprises that create employment and employment pathways for people experiencing disadvantage over the last few years. And they're a very important part of the social enterprise sector, but in fact only represent about 1/3 of the entire population of the sector. It's so terrific to see community radio stations, community-owned banks, Aboriginal corporations, arts-based social enterprises, festivals and others represented in those who've come along today. If you don't know, social enterprises actually operate in every industry of the Australian economy, and you serve a huge variety of community and social purposes. And that's been both a challenge and an ambition of what we've tried to do with Seedkit. I also want to acknowledge that it does take an ecosystem to lift the impacts of social enterprise, and also acknowledge all the people who are here from the broader ecosystem today. On that matter of ecosystem, we'll move to the next slide. Apologies. We've got a video first. Sorry, my apologies. Before we get into the background, what we did want to do was actually start with some of the people from the social enterprise sector who are have been actively involved in the development of Seedkit, and just to hear from them very briefly some reflections about the issues related to social impact and outcomes measurement.
So if there's one thing that I would tell everybody about measuring and communicating impact, it's to stop first and make up a strategy of doing exactly that.
You need to take the time to bring people along on the journey, and by keeping it simple so they can understand it, and then building over time, you can add in that sort of level of detail that you might be after.
The number one thing is probably working out what your intended purpose and impact is. Like starting with that and working backwards is what I would say. Much better to imperfectly measure what matters than to perfectly measure something that's adjacent or not really related, or what someone else thinks should be connected up.
So that is part of one video that forms a suite of learning resources that are available on Seedkit, and my acknowledgement to Kate, Ian and Mikey, who we've probably sprung that on. They are the stars of some of these videos, and it's been great to have them involved in some of that work. We would like to now acknowledge the funders for Seedkit, and I'll hand to Lib as the lead on the project to do that.
So thanks, Jo. Seedkit is an initiative of the Centre for Social Impact at Swinburne in partnership with Melbourne Social Equity Institute, but its development was very generously funded by the Victorian State Government as part of their social enterprise strategy, and we'd particularly like to acknowledge the support of the Victoria State Government in seed funding and getting Seedkit to the point that we are launching today. I'd also like to acknowledge, and I think Jo's going to step us through a timeline in a short amount of time, but acknowledge the earlier support of both Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and Family Life in helping and supporting and funding the prototype earlier versions of Seedkit that you'll see where Seedkit came from in terms of action, research and thinking that you'll see in a timeline in a short amount of time. So back to you, Jo.
Thank you, Lib. So as we've already mentioned, it takes an ecosystem to scale the impacts of social entrepreneurship, but it also takes an ecosystem to build a Seedkit as it happens. And this platform has been co-designed with a great number of people, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we did also want to acknowledge the wide range of organisations in the broader ecosystem who've generously contributed their time and energy to the development of Seedkit, also to the earlier working prototype, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm not going to try and acknowledge individuals because, like with Academy Award speeches, I'll miss someone, but this word cloud is our best effort to acknowledge the vast array of organisations who've been involved in developing or supporting the emergence of Seedkit in one way or another. So just talking a little bit about the timeline, and it goes back a fair way. In fact, I'm just feeling a bit old looking at that. Back in 2010, I worked at Queensland University of Technology at the Australian Centre for Philanthropy and Non-Profit Studies, and I'm aware that at least one of my colleagues from there is on the call. Hi, Ruth. I held the first research position in Australia dedicated to social enterprise research, and that was funded by the Westpac Foundation. And during that course of work, we conducted an action research project with small to medium social enterprises about measuring and communicating their social impacts. Some of these findings would not be particularly surprising to many of you, but one of the things we found was that small social enterprises often had a large turnover of staff, which made it, partly because of the way they were funded, they were often project funded, which made it really difficult for them to sustain the institutional memory, if you like, or organisational memory and capability to maintain effective outcomes measurement and evaluation. Another thing that we found in that project was that often boards of social enterprises weren't really evaluation ready. And what we mean by that was that boards didn't necessarily understand what was involved in evaluation and outcomes measurement, didn't necessarily have the preparedness to resource that or to support the work that was needed. Scroll forward a long time to work that we did at CSI Swinburne when I was the director there prior to Libby. And we conducted a second action research project with funding from Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation and Family Life. And that project, again, found some of the similar sorts of issues. But what we did find in that action research project was that things had moved along a bit, and there was some capability and built-in resource around evaluation and outcomes measurement in some social enterprises. And not surprisingly, those were the social enterprises who perhaps reaped the greatest benefit from working with university researchers to further develop their work. So that's not a surprise, but it's a concern, because it suggests the usual thing, which is that it's much easier to get from B to C than it is to get from A to B when you're first starting out with this kind of work. Out of that project, which is called the Social Enterprise Impact Lab, Libby was a researcher on that, as was our colleague Helena Skeepers, who's here. We developed the working prototype or the preliminary prototype that then has moved into Seedkit. The first stage of Seedkit has been at the beginning of 2022. We've had just over a year to develop Seedkit with the generous investment from the Victorian government. The tricky thing about getting Seedkit built has been the time frame, with just over a year to get that done, and actually having a bit of a time push on you is not always a bad thing. But I think do acknowledge our colleagues, particularly Warren and Joanne, who've been burning the midnight oil to get this work done. But the commitment to Seedkit was to co-design. So we co-designed Seedkit with the involvement of 32 Victorian social enterprises, and they've been variously involved with us at stages of the build and the user experience design for this platform. I really want to acknowledge the generous contributions that all of those social enterprises have made, and they're fully listed on the Seedkit platform. We did a preliminary prototype release in January 2023, which was effectively transferring the Social Enterprise Impact Lab prototype into a Seedkit sleeve, if you like. And since then, I've been working through designing the prototype and then recently releasing the platform for people who are involved in the co-design process to play with. Apart from the people who are involved from the social enterprises who are involved, we also want to acknowledge that one of the things we know about outcomes and impact measurement is, while you can do excellent work based on what's needed by an organisation, organisations sit within ecosystems, and it is important for organisations to be able to meet the needs of their external stakeholders. Now, we think personally, collectively, that the best reason to measure and communicate your outcomes is to learn rather than to prove that your approach to things is the only approach or the best approach. But that said, we're also aware that social enterprises are procured by other organisations. They are invested in and funded and supported by different sectors, and there are needs of those external stakeholders. So a number of people from impact investing, from philanthropy and from government and procurement have been also generous in providing us with insight into what they need from this platform for it to be usable. And that brings us to today, where we're launching what we have described as a minimum lovable product. We are aware that Seedkit has huge potential to do more than it will, and Lib will show you some of what it does do momentarily. But what we do want to acknowledge is that fingers crossed, there will be some bugs, and we're hoping that this community, as we know, will work with us to find the bugs that we've missed despite extensive testing over the last month. But we do hope that this product in its current form will provide basic services from which we can develop user insights and understanding to advance the design of Seedkit into the future. So the journey is not yet over. Thanks. So what's the purpose of Seedkit? Well, one of the things that we know through, in my case, 25 years of research is that small to medium social enterprises in particular, but all social enterprises actually generally report in most pieces of research that we do on the sector that, that there is an unmet need around being able to document and communicate social impact. And it has come up over and over again. So it came up in the National Mapping of Social Enterprise, Finding Australia's Social Enterprise Sector, which I led in 2016. It came up in the Victorian Government Commissioned Research Map for Impact a couple of years later. It came up in the Victorian consultation for the development of the current social enterprise strategy. And it came up at the Social Enterprise World Forum that was hosted in Brisbane last year. So a repeated message from social enterprises that this work is hard and that their resources and capacity to do it are minimal. The other thing I'd note about that, though, is there is a tendency in these kinds of conversations to suggest that the capacity issue sits only with social enterprises. I wanted to provide some reflection as a researcher in the sector and the ecosystem more broadly. Research that we've done on social procurement, on social finance and other issues have found it's not only social enterprises, it's also those who are investing in them and procuring from them who find measuring, communicating social impact challenging. So we saw that again when we did the co-design and consultation process for Seedkit. There is a range of both sophistication, ability and interest in measuring, communicating social impact, and it's not exclusive to social enterprises. It also affects the organisations with whom they work and who fund them. The next thing we wanted to do with Seedkit is to build a robust evidence base about social enterprise activities and contributions. And apologies to those who've heard this before, because I've now used this line several times in activities associated with Seedkit, but having been the person who's led historically most of the mapping work around social enterprise in Australia, I thought quite some time ago now that maybe if we had a tool that was really useful for you guys, then at the back end, we could aggregate information in a way that absolutely protects your privacy and anonymity, so that we could generate insights about the sector, which is hard to find because you're invisible. You're invisible because there's a mixed economy of social enterprises in Australia. You're incorporated variously by state and federal governments. There's no central knowledge or data collection about social enterprises. And what we thought was, would a tool that was really useful to you as individual organisations also allow the added value of being able to generate aggregated insights about the sector to serve the sector itself and to serve government, philanthropy and investors who are interested in trends in the sector? So that's the other piece to the Seedkit logic. And that is enough for me. Over to you, Lib.
No, I think this is you as well, Jo.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh, I'm sorry, people. I'm clearly not on top of things today. So what is the novelty of the approach for Seedkit? As I've described, it's been informed by research activity. And I guess the other part to that, without over stretching the experience of the team in terms of what happens at the front line with social enterprise, because we're the first to acknowledge that we don't have deep experience in that. What we do have is collectively between us about 60 years of experience of working quite actively with social enterprises on applied and scholarly research. So that research evidence, what we know already, has informed quite a lot of the design. that it has been co-designed, and that is novel and is really, we hope, as responsive as possible to the diversity of social enterprises who've been involved so far. The platform integrates business and impact measures, and we think that's super important. So why is that important? It's because social enterprises often have their impact baked into their business model, and it is quite hard to assess, for example, the social impact of social enterprise X that might have quite a different revenue model to the social impact of enterprise Y, where revenue generation is not actually objective and is not necessarily feasible if that particular social enterprise is responding, for example, to market failure. So we think this is the first tool worldwide that integrates both business characteristics and impact measures. This is a not-for-profit activity, so it's resourced by the Victorian government to do the build. And part of our contractual agreement is that this remains a not-for-profit activity, and the data that you put into Seedkit is owned by you or your organisation, more accurately, and can be withdrawn by your organisation at any time. But the architecture is owned by Swinburne and the University of Melbourne. And then finally, it is intended for ongoing development to meet evolving user needs. Of course, we have to have the caveat there, subject to further investment. And we'll come back, now that I know what I'm doing, a bit later on to just tell you what plans for the next steps might look like.
Thanks, Jo. That was terrific. So now I'm going to start to step us through some of the key features of that we've designed into Seedkit as a result of that co-design approach and the input of our co-design, social enterprise co-design group, as well as the other ecosystem stakeholders that Jo described. These included funders, intermediaries, impact investors, etc. So the first design feature that we'd like to highlight is that Seedkit's design acknowledges the structural diversity of social enterprise in Australia. So many of you will know from the structure of your own organisation, but more broadly, that social enterprises not only exist under a number of different legal forms, they also exist under a number of different organisational structures. So we can have social enterprises that exist as completely standalone entities or organisations. We also have social enterprises that are business units of larger organisations that also have non-social enterprise activity. And also we sometimes see a social enterprise, but actually that has several different social enterprises operating within or as part of a larger social enterprise structure. So we needed to acknowledge all of those different organisational units or forms as potential units of analysis in Seedkit. Similarly, so when you go in to Seedkit to register, you first register at the organisational level, and hopefully you can see that, although I'm conscious that it might be a bit pale on the screen, but obviously you can go in and have a play after this. So you register at that organisational level and provide a range of sort of key registration information, including ABN, the name of your organisation, however you want to frame that, you know, things like whether you are registered or your organisation is registered with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, and also a high order description of your organisation's social purpose. Next then, as part of that, Seedkit then enables, once an organisation's been registered, to add a number of different analysis units. So any organisation can add one or more social enterprises that they want to track the impacts and operations of that enterprise or multiple enterprises and report against those social enterprise units. The other thing that we heard from the co-design process was that there was also value in being able to quarantine out and specifically monitor and report again either programs of work or projects. And particularly this is important if there is a specific sort of time-bound project, for example. Sorry, my light's gone out. that you may want to report on specifically to a funder or your board, for example. So there's that capability in Seedkit as well. And then next, another key and important feature of Seedkit is the indicators library. So Seedkit at the moment, as the informed by both co-design and also our previous research and experience, contains just under 600 indicators. 11 of those sit under the impact domains, or what we call the changing the world domains. And then there are 4 management domains, which is about managing the operations of your social enterprise or program or project. We would say, though, that we're really aware that any co-design process and the knowledge that's generated from it is limited to who was involved. And at this stage, that's 32 social enterprises, along with the other stakeholders and members of the ecosystem that we've consulted. So while we hope that this current indicator library is a good reflection of the diversity of social enterprises in Australia in terms of the impacts you create and also the industries that you operate in, there is also the potential within Seedkit to create your own indicators or to tailor the ones that currently sit in the indicator library. And so that's a reflection of your organisational needs. But when you tailor those, they don't become immediately visible to others using the Seedkit platform through the library. Our intention is to continue to learn from the indicators that you may be creating or tailoring. And if we see that, if and when, probably when, we see themes emerging consistently, or that there's an indication that there are gaps in the current library because of what people are creating, then we'll add either new domains and or indicators into the Seedkit indicator library. So, and then of course, one of the key features and important aspects of Seedkit is not only for social enterprises to be able to monitor their and input data, but also to then visualize that data and track it over time. And once that visualization occurs, Seedkit has the feature of being able to build dashboards that are downloadable for social enterprises to share with their stakeholders, be they internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. As Joe mentioned earlier, data sovereignty is a really, really important principle for us in building Seedkit. So no one else can see any social enterprises' identifiable data. It's not a dashboard of that anyone can log into and see. It's about social enterprises owning and controlling their data and sharing with those internal and external stakeholders that they choose. So we've just got a very brief video to watch now on how that data can be very easily visualized.
Welcome to Seedkit. It just takes a few clicks to create graphs, charts, and tables. Let's create a new reporting element here. Follow the steps on the screen to create a new graph. Select the reporting period. Add data. Add more details. And it's done.
Back to you, Joe.
Thanks, Liv. And speaking to our colleague Joanne's multi-capability, she, among many other things apart from project management, is also the spokesperson on those how-to videos. Seedkit's also a learning platform. So we recognise that different organisations and individuals are at different stages in developing their interest and skills in evaluation and outcomes measurement. And we are, as well as being researchers, we're adult educators. And so what we've sought to do with Seedkit is to create learning resources, and that will continue. There's a few on there now that may be of use to people. It also includes some news items that relate to particular things that are going on in fact, internationally around outcomes measurement and evaluation and social enterprise. But the resources are there to assist people and organisations who are at different stages, who are starting out, and who are more advanced but are thinking about next steps with regard to what they're going to be doing with their data, not just what they're collecting. The resources have been generated from our research insights from the various action research projects and co-design activities that we've already described. And I think the other thing that we need to recognise, and I'll speak to it with regard to future directions shortly, is that as adult educators, we know that about 70% of what we learn happens through doing, not by talking about things. So tech alone is not going to solve the needs of the ecosystem around outcomes measurement and evaluation. But what we do hope is that with integration of learning activities, we will be able to make best use of Seedkit in the interests of development for everyone and the field. So moving on, what's next? Well, the first thing is we'd love it if you haven't already, if you'd be interested in joining the Seedkit community. And we've got the QR code will take those who like such things straight to the Seedkit site for registration as an organisation on the site. Just noting a question from Brendan that was in the chat, and which I answered in the chat, was a question about whether Seedkit can be used by organisations that may not actually be social enterprises. It absolutely can. There's really no limitation on who can use Seedkit. So if you are an enterprising not-for-profit or community organisation starting out on this journey, we still think that there's material in the architecture to help you. We also want to do a shout out for our LinkedIn site. I think we've got 237 followers after the first 2 weeks. So we'd love it for those of you who are on LinkedIn to connect and to, be able to use that site where we'll be putting up notifications and information as Seedkit rolls out and as new development occurs. We'd also love for those of you who feel, warmly towards our minimum lovable product, if you might share it with others through social media and whatever means is most relevant to your networks. As we've said, this is genuinely been built with public value in mind. We are not used car salespeople. We are very much concerned with this being a public value, a public good. But that said, we know about tech that it's only as good as its use. So if people don't start to use it and test and work out what's working and what's not and what they need, then we won't be able to further evolve the platform. We are aware, despite extensive testing, and I suspect Warren working through the night for at least the last few days, that there will be bugs. I do want to do a second shout out to Warren Armstrong, who has a programming history of some 25 years, including having done some major builds, such as being centrally involved in some of the ABC's digital transformation activity a long time ago now. Warren has reflected this is the most complicated build he's ever had to do. And, in true social enterprise style, he's been doing it as a one-person programmer, rather than if he was in a tech startup of another nature, he'd probably have 2 or 3 helpers. So we're super conscious that there is likely, because of the complexity of the platform, there's likely to be some bugs, and we hope it doesn't stop you. We hope you'll reach out to us. We will be at the other end of the email to do our very best to respond to those. So what's going to happen next? Because Seedkit's, this is just the beginning, even though we're all feeling a bit exhausted. The first thing that's going to happen is that a couple of key members of our team are going to take a well-needed rest because I'm not really sure that we as part of the social enterprise ecosystem should be practicing what we have been, which is complete experience of overwork. I think I don't know about you, but I think 2023 has been a big one, and I think everyone's hitting the wall early, so there will be a bit of a rest. But apart from that, what are the things we want to do? Now that Seedkit is live in the wilderness, we're going to need to do quite a lot of user testing, checking in with users, and looking at the back end to see how things are being used and where things are not and why that might be. We want to be doing platform refinement and learning and developing further learning activities to support strong uptake of Seedkit. Some of these activities and the next ones I'm going to describe are going to be contingent on the future funding for Seedkit. We do want to acknowledge that we've had a generous small grant provided to us by Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation to provide bridging to ensure that we don't enter the tech startup valley of death. That combined with the rest of the current grant provided by the Victorian government will allow us over the first 6 months of 2024 to support the onboarding of people who are using Seedkit, providing basic advice and doing the kinds of basic refinements and bug testing that we need to do to make sure that the platform is working. During that time, we'll also be doing the business modelling to support future investment in Seedkit, and would acknowledge that we're already having some positive conversations. What are the top priorities for us for Seedkit Mark II based on what we've heard and what we know? A few of them. The first one is, as we've talked about before, combining the platform with more adult education and training activities to support people to make best use of this resource. The next one is advancing the architecture of Seedkit for some things that we know the sector is doing. One of those is collaborating across organisations, and the architecture is already built into Seedkit to do that, but there's more work needs to be done to bring that to life. We're also aware that social enterprises are incredibly organisationally diverse, and there are some that have quite complex nested structures in their businesses and their parent business. At a basic level, you can already attend to some of that complexity through the organisation social enterprise program logic that Libby described, but we know that there's some complexity and bespoke design organisational arrangements of some social enterprises we want to address. We're very committed to Seedkit remaining in the public domain and with the needs and interests of social enterprise at its heart. So we'll be establishing advisory governance arrangements while Seedkit remains a function of the participating universities. And the next thing then will be talking to relevant organisations about whether and how we integrate different data collection and use activities in the sector to make these activities truly serve social enterprises. So we're aware, for example, that by way of example, some social enterprises are certified. Many social enterprises are working with Social Enterprise Australia. Other social enterprises have other certifications and registrations. Some are engaged in social procurement. We're not going to probably be able to solve that completely, but I guess a principle for us is let's tread lightly on social enterprises wherever we can and make sure that data is being collected once and used often wherever it is possible to do so. We think that there is great potential for the use of AI in supporting users of Seedkit to make the selection of indicators and the development of impact pathways much easier than it is for if you're doing it manually without background expertise. So we hope to be doing that, and also that there's a role for AI to make greater thematic sense of the qualitative material that you can upload into Seedkit to develop your reporting. On the issue of data sovereignty, we did just want to acknowledge that again. There is a basic principle of data sovereignty in the sense of who owns data in here, but we want to acknowledge the importance of data sovereignty. When the germ of the idea of Seedkit came up 7 or 8 years ago, it was partly led by a researcher interest being mine in how we might be able to collect and make sense of data for the sector without asking you to fill out surveys all the time. I think that that's a principle that's still important and potentially useful about Seedkit, but you know, we live in an era where questions around who owns and gets to use data is a super important issue. And we don't want the logic of Seedkit to in any way inhibit issues of data sovereignty for particular groups. And I'm particularly concerned about this in relation to First Nations social enterprises and making sure that in asking users to agree to terms of reference that their data can be looked at the back end, that we are not engaging in processes that are in contradiction with principles of self-determination and community control. So one of the things that we will be looking at in the future is what licensing arrangements might be available to provide particular parts of the sector to use Seedkit in a way that best suits them rather than what best suits researchers. That provides you with a bit of an overview of some of the immediate goals. And super quickly, conscious we want to give you plenty of time for questions, and I can see people putting some in the chat. The other thing, a couple of longer term things that we're aware of, and I can see, in fact, there's a question. I haven't looked at the chat for a while because I've been talking, but I saw that there was a question about, have you thought about aligning indicators to a particular set of standards with regard to environment? Yes, we think that there's great scope for bespoke offerings and use of the platform for the knowledge needs of particular parts of the sector and also the broader ecosystem. That those bespoke offerings are going to need to be developed on a case-by-case basis, and we see that as part of the potential future of Seedkit. The other longer-term perspective is the internationalisation of Seedkit. It will be no surprise to anyone that the Victorian government, who generously have invested in this, are smart people who recognise that as soon as you create an online platform, it's available to anyone. So this is, even though this is a project that was designed with and for Victorian social enterprises, Seedkit is now in the world and is available. We would expect in the first instance that it's most relevant to social enterprises in Australia, but longer term, we could see potential for further advancing the platform so that international social enterprises can also make best use of the platform. So that gives you a bit of overview of what we think should be done and what the aspirations might be. That's enough from me. A lot of talking. Thank you for your attention. We're now going to turn to your questions. And in order to discipline me, I am moderating those, and Libby will answer most of them, and maybe more of our team might also help. So I might just quickly answer Lucy's question first, though, Lib, which is the last one coming up. Were any ACOs involved in co-design? So there were originally two Aboriginal controlled organisations and one Aboriginal owned organisation involved in the co-design group. There was a bit of attrition from the co-design group, which may or may not have been to do with questions of cultural competence of the design. We actually had a number of smaller enterprises step out of the co-design early on because it's been a particularly stressful year coming out of the height of lockdown. So they haven't been as involved as we would like, and we need to do some more work on that, Lucy.
Jo, I also noticed, noted down a few questions in the chat while you were speaking as well. There's a few that we can probably jump on address now. One is, and I know you're moderating, but I just was going to give you some time to catch up. So one was there's a couple of questions around trying to minimise duplication of effort and systems integration. I don't know if you want to answer that, or I can answer that, or one of the other.
You go for it, Liv.
Okay.
Got something to say? One
of our underlying principles in developing Seedkit is obviously, the whole basis of it is to reduce the burden on social enterprises constantly being, or quite regularly being asked for data and information, et cetera, through things like research and surveys. But also what we've tried to build here is something that is useful to enterprises and that they will want to use. If it's not, we'll hear about it or we will know. But similarly, one of the things that we are aiming to do, and probably was originally, it was originally on our, we hope to get to it by now, is the ability to integrate with other platforms, be it Xero, and other CRMs and other things that social enterprises regularly use to house some of their data. Similarly, we have had social traders have been a really important member of our project steering committee, and we are continuing to work with social traders to see how we can minimise and add value to enterprises that are having reporting into social traders for their certification purposes as well. So the aim of the game is ultimately that there won't be duplication of data entry and effort, but I would say it would be fair to say at this point that that is, next phase of development kind of stuff.
Thank you, Lib. And it also goes to the bespoke offerings idea.
Yes.
So I think one of the things we know from previous prototype builds is that, some social enterprises are very centrally engaged with contracting through particular government departments who have their own outcomes measurement requirements. That goes to the extent to which we can develop bespoke offerings that serve the needs of those organisations. There's a question here, Lib, from Jody about will social enterprises be able to benchmark their programs against others? Do you want to take that?
I can take that. Ultimately, we know that benchmarking is really attractive, but reliable and robust benchmarking actually requires a really big sample. It's actually not that meaningful if there's not enough data in there to draw from, that some sort of benchmark has been informed by various models, and also understanding, what we see in social enterprise in particular is things like stage of development, location, industry of operation, the specifics of a particular target cohort. For example, even though you could have two social enterprises that are operating to provide employment opportunities or pathways to people that are marginalised from the labour force, the nature of that those barriers to employment can actually mean that things aren't necessarily that comparable. So we are being very cautious about sort of leaping on the benchmarking wagon before we've got a big enough sample size, if you like, or user base that can be absolutely meaningful, and we can revisit it at that point. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Jo.
No, that's great. There's a question from M about wondering about how onerous inputting data is and how manual it is, which kind of links a little bit to the other question about integrated systems. Joanne, I don't know if you want to pick that up quickly in terms of what's possible with regard to importing and exporting.
Sure, Jo. Just on that note, so in the current version, Seedkit does support both manual entering of data as well as downloading a template from the Seedkit side into a CSV file, and then we upload that CSV file to the platform. So system integration does, it's on our mind. We're aware of the need for that, and we did hear the co-design group have spoke loudly about that need. So we're currently exploring different options to work on system integration. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. And Christy and Susan, Anitra's indicated that the LinkedIn link is not working, the one on the slides. If you don't mind sticking in the chat, that would be great.
Just add there, if you just go to LinkedIn and search for Seedkit Social Enterprise, it will come up.
Yeah. Ben's asked what's different about the tool. It doesn't look dissimilar to available products in functionality, ease, etc. So Ben, as we said before, we're not salespeople, the Seedkit. It's been built based on fairly extensive research and contributions from social enterprises. We think that in our experience, there are very few resources that are available that genuinely understand what social enterprises are and also recognise their diversity. So the functionality that's in the platform is designed specifically with social enterprises in mind. And the other part to it that I think is different is that it is also a learning platform about evaluation and outcomes measurement rather than a sort of plug and forget tool. And we think that that's super important because I think evaluation and outcomes measurement is sometimes treated very instrumentally. And of course, users may continue to use this platform in that way. But I think what we're trying to encourage is actually a culture of learning, not just about how to do this stuff, but learning from the evaluation and outcomes measurement so that people are making best use of that information to improve their impacts.
And if I can just add to that and bang on about one of the things that we're particularly, I guess, proud of with Seedkit, it is the acknowledgement of the social enterprise business model as different to other models of either whether they be commercial business models or more traditional welfare type social impact generation models. I think it's particularly important that enterprises can build visualizations of data that track impact alongside things like the amount of revenue and growth in revenue from trade, for example, because as many social enterprise practitioners more than appreciate, effectively revenue generation is the engine room for impact creation in the social enterprise model. And we are not aware of any other platform that allows that to be done in one place.
Thanks, Lib. Julie's got a question about whether this integrates with whether the business and impact measures relate to the UNSD goal mapping and ESG mapping. You'll appreciate, Julie, that there's multiple frameworks and indices that intersect with social enterprises. They have informed the creation of the indicators library, but similarly, because of the sheer diversity of the sector and the kinds of frameworks to which it's with which it's engaged, that's the other purpose of the tailoring possibilities of the indicators, is that, you know, particular individual users can determine for themselves rather than be guided by a one-size-fits-all. So there is the indicator, I guess the key message is the indicators library is informed, but is not prescribed by some of those higher order indexes and frameworks. There's a question here from Matt Knopp, which we might both need to take, which is about how do you incentivize social enterprises to report accurately, given their time poor, capability light, and reporting similar data to others.
You want to start?
Sure. I mean, I think, Matt, that's one of the big questions. But I think, you know, my own experience is that people and organisations use things when they're useful, and it's not the job of Seedkit. It goes back to my comment before that, you know, tech alone does not solve an issue. It really comes down to the culture of an organisation, whether they're evaluation and outcomes measurement ready. And we'd hope that through the learning activities of the platform and other things that go on in the ecosystem, that we'd see advancement in that area. But I think that the other thing is, without pointing the finger at your organisation, one of the things we're hoping for is that this activity may actually help discipline organisations in the ecosystem who require information of social enterprises, so that there's greater efficiency for those social enterprises. And the example that I'm sure you're aware of has been in the collaborative funding of work integration social enterprises that multiple foundations, including your own, are involved in at the moment. And the architects of that program spoke with us prior to doing the EOI for that about what indicators in Seedkit they might invite participating social enterprises to use. And I think that's a fantastic outcome, because that's philanthropy recognising that they're often asking social enterprises for the same information in 15 different ways. And if we can rationalise it at one end, that might actually help to tread more lightly on social enterprises. Liv, not sure if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that, you know, there's a push and a pull factor around reporting, particularly to external stakeholders. And, you know, the fact that funders and investors can actually also go into Seedkit and look at the indicators bank and potentially decide collectively on what indicators are most meaningful to them, and also to the enterprises that they're potentially funding or investing in. Actually, we're hoping will drive efficiency, even down to the point of potentially reporting on the, you know, being asked to report on the same thing, but with 3 slightly different metrics across 3 different funders and those sorts of things. So yeah, we're hoping that this is an opportunity to sort of coalesce around some agreed indicators that should reduce that duplication of effort and reporting burden for enterprises.
Thanks, Liv. Conscious of time, so we'll just take a couple more. There's a question from, and we'll try to answer more through the LinkedIn site and follow up from this webinar. And also noting this is just a launch. I shouldn't say just, it's a launch. We're very excited about that, but there will be other opportunities for discussion and communication about how to use Seedkit. But there's a question from Bob saying, can we aggregate the data for intermediaries like SECNA or QSEC, etc.? That again goes, I think, to the sort of idea about bespoke offerings, Bob. And I guess technically the answer is absolutely yes. And in terms of our values, the spirit of the answer is absolutely we should. My reflection from having had oversight of previous data sets such as the Finding Australia's Social Enterprise Sector and Map for Impact data sets is that this stuff is not done magically. There needs to be quite a lot of cleaning of data and analysis that's done at the back end by people who need to be paid salaries. So some of those possibilities will only be realised if we, once we do the business modelling for Seedkit and negotiate further investment and or other revenue streams. Yeah,
I think it's important to emphasise that Seedkit isn't just, you know, at the back end isn't collecting data and sort of pressing the button and spitting out insights. It's a way of collecting and aggregating data that will need to be rigorously and robustly analysed, just in the same way as if we were doing any other sort of data collection mechanism, such as a survey. There's qualifiers and sorting and analysis from, you know, people that understand social enterprise to get to that point. So it's not an auto-generated report that would be coming out at the end for those purposes.
Yeah. And I'll just answer to one more question from Chris, conscious we've got to wrap up at 2, which is a question about the aggregated data and will that be available for download by funders, researchers, etc. We are researchers, and Seedkit has been built to live in the commons with public value in mind. So any aggregated insights analysis that the research team does for the purposes of the sector will be made publicly available. Absolutely. We will probably be invited to do more bespoke analysis for particular organisations such as government, and that would depend on the conditions of doing that work, but we would be very much pushing for making as much insight as publicly available as possible and making sure that that serves the sector first and foremost. So it's a little bit of it's not 100% nailed yes, no, but it's a bit more complicated than that. But our intention is to socialise and make public knowledge as much as we possibly can. I think that we're at time, Lib, so I hand back to you.
Thanks very much, Jo. I was just responding to a question. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Please, as Jo said, some of those things, jump on Seedkit now. Absolutely follow us on our LinkedIn page, because that's where we will be providing further answers to questions, or you can ask more questions and also giving you updates of what's next for Seedkit. But I guess the rallying call at the moment is jump on, use it, play with it. And if you find any bugs at all, please let us know. But thank you very much for your time and support.